Tonight, the Russia probe kicking into high gear. Paul Manafort's plea deal with Bob Mueller falls apart. Now the president saying a pardon for Manafort isn't off the table. Those are just two of the many headlines we'll discuss with a former federal prosecutor. Then we will head out to the federal courthouse in Brooklyn for a live report on the El Chapo trial, and our legal panel will weigh in on the difficulties when it comes to prosecuting a Mexican drug lord on U.S. soil. And we'll also give you the very latest from D.C., where it's yet another busy and eventful day. That's another word for crazy. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you for joining us. Tons of developments to report tonight in the Mueller probe. So let's get right to it. CNN reporting that they've gotten a hold of two of the answers Donald Trump provided to Bob Mueller. This from the CNN piece, quote, Trump told Mueller in writing that Roger Stone did not tell him about WikiLeaks, nor was he told about the 2016 Trump Tower meeting between his son, Donnie Jr., campaign officials, and a Russian lawyer promising dirt on Hillary Clinton, that according to two sources familiar with the matter. Then, of course, there's Paul Manafort. A court filing from Mueller says Manafort breached his plea agreement by repeatedly lying to the special counsel and the FBI. So that deal now off the table. Also, multiple reports saying one of Manafort's attorneys has been briefing President Trump's lawyers about Manafort's discussions with Mueller. Then there is the question about whether or not President Trump has been either back-channeling or is even considering pardoning Manafort. Well, we just got a very clear indicator where his head's at. Trump just telling the New York Post that, quote, a pardon is not off the table. Unbelievable. A lot of this is raising a ton of legal questions. New York Congressman Jerry Nadler, he's raising a big one. He's the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. That means come January, he's got the gavel. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Any attempt to get him to change his testimony or not to testify by dangling a pardon would be obstruction of justice.
So joining us to discuss that and, well, just about everything, former federal prosecutor Roland Riopelle. Now, I'm going to introduce a legal term tonight to our audience, freaking crazy. So I count, as the layman here, Roland, at least a dozen examples of obstruction in the last 24 hours that have come out. I don't understand any of the political rationale or even the legal for that matter. The president not just winking, but saying out loud, apparently over his counsel's better judgment, that a pardon could be on the table for Manafort, which we know has been double dealing with, obviously, Mueller, and the plea deal now off the table. Unbelievable set of developments. So many, am I right? But obstruction seems rampant.
This is, I think, the action of a very desperate man. I think Trump hears Mueller's footsteps coming now, and he realizes that Mueller set him up by having Manafort into his office, interviewing him, and apparently monitoring Manafort's lawyer reporting on the interviews back to Trump. And Trump is now desperate. He knows he's in trouble. He knows, I think, that he has told the same lies in his sworn statement that Manafort was telling to Mueller and that caused Mueller's plea agreement to get torn up.
Roland, let's explain to the audience,
because he's in trouble.
So let's explain, because I'm even a little confused in this. A joint defense agreement. Okay, certainly there's been a ton of folks that have been indicted, cooperating witness throughout this. Take Flynn, for example. He, all of a sudden, once he became a cooperating witness, he shut off all access to the president's counsel, etc. Is what Manafort's attorneys did, and certainly the allegations are that they'd meet with Mueller, they'd go right back and they'd go talk to the president's attorneys and say, they asked us the following questions, which to me at least seems to be in violation of what the terms of the plea agreement would be, but moreover, this is obstructing because now all of a sudden you could be coaching answers. Is it illegal or impractical what they did?
It's both, potentially. We don't know yet for certain, Richard, that a crime was committed because we don't know yet whether Trump tailored his written answers or gave a false written answer based on the information provided by Mr. Manafort's counsel. If he did, then that is witness tampering by Manafort, and for Trump, it is obstruction of justice and perjury. So if that's what happened, yes, it is criminal, and it is certainly, to use the legal term that we've used before, mashugana by Mr. Manafort's counsel to be doing this. He was not representing Manafort's best interest at that point. He was representing Mr. Trump. And that is a lawyer who I think should at some point be in deep trouble with the disciplinary committee.
And I think the biggest loser out of all of this is Manafort, because even if somehow, some way there's some plea deal, there's a ton of state exposure, whether it be they go from the Manhattan courthouse there in the Southern District, they go over to Brooklyn and they try this in the state level, they do this in Virginia. Manafort's got no options left. But here's the question that I get asked most often, which is, with the Manafort plea deal blown up, who's the biggest loser out of this from Mueller? Is Mueller in trouble because Manafort was the linchpin to the case here? And you used, when you answered this before the show, you said one's playing 3 or 4-dimensional chess and the other one's playing basically Connect 4. Explain how Manafort, now being persona non grata here for this case, harms or doesn't Mueller's basic hand.
I don't think it harms Mueller's basic hand, and I think Mueller's hand, as against Trump, has been strengthened significantly by the recent developments. I think that Mueller has just reams and wealths of information that we don't even know. And Mr. Mueller knows the story. He knew what had happened before Manafort ever set foot in his office. And Manafort lied about it, committed new crimes in doing so, and that didn't weaken Mueller's hand. In fact, it strengthened it, because Manafort became a kind of decoy, going to Trump, peddling the lies that he told to Manafort, and probably causing Trump to repeat the same falsehoods and thereby committing perjury and obstruction of justice. So that strengthened Mueller's hand against Trump. Now, he didn't need to have this extra evidence, but having it makes his case against Trump much, much more powerful, if that's what happened, and it seems like that has to be what happened.
Now, again, I've got nothing to base this off of, but I'm curious. At the very beginning, Mueller clearly knew that he was dealing with a bottom feeder of the first order as related to Paul Manafort.
Right.
Twice. He slapped him down from trying to do witness tampering here, as well as also not being forthright. Is there a chance, knowing that that Manafort was probably going to try and play every angle, including trying to still fish for a pardon, that they could have been monitoring, and somehow, some way, they have some correspondence between the counsel for the president and the counsel for Manafort? Here's the quid pro quo if you want a pardon?
That's not beyond the realm of possibility. If Mr. Mueller had evidence that Manafort's lawyer was communicating with Trump's counsel for the purpose of enabling Trump's counsel and Trump to commit obstruction of justice and perjury, you'd be able to monitor phone calls of that kind. Now, that's a very high hurdle to get over, to get a judge to decide that a lawyer is in the middle of a crime and therefore his communication should be monitored. More likely, there's been physical surveillance and other things, perhaps emails subpoenaed or text messages subpoenaed, that have given Mr. Mueller the evidence that he needs. But just the fact that Manafort's lawyer was sharing the results of the meetings with Mueller, sharing those results with Trump, is so damning for both Manafort and Trump. It's terrible.
I got about 5 minutes left. There's so much more I want to get to. So first off, we talked about the 2 answers that CNN obtained that Trump gave in writing. We also learned of a development that Roland...
Terribly, terribly dubious. Too,
right, and let's go with one of them, that he didn't know of any Trump Tower meeting. there apparently is on the radar of Mueller this blocked phone call from Donnie Jr.'s cell phone.
Right.
If, as most suspect, that call went from Donnie Jr. to call down to Dad's office to say, we got to talk about the meeting I just had. We got potentially pay dirt here on Hillary, and that comes out. Doesn't that prove the president perjured himself?
It does. It does. And indeed, I'm not going to be shocked, Richard, when the history is written on this. If Mueller asked Manafort that question directly, do you know if Donald Jr. called Daddy, or did Donald Jr. call Daddy? And Manafort said, no, he didn't call Daddy. He called somebody else. I know it's not Trump. And Mueller knew that was a lie when Manafort gave it, and Mueller's group may have just said, well, okay, wrote their notes down and moved on. And then Manafort and his lawyer went back to Trump and said they're buying the story that Donnie Jr.'s call wasn't to you. And Trump, therefore, lied about it. That could be the fact here. That could be the way this happened.
For folks who don't know some of the bit players, and my God, is it a rogues gallery? Jerome Corsi, he's a right-wing conspiracy theorist. Right. He's a friend of Roger Stone's, who's a delight in his own right. He's also in Mueller's crosshairs over WikiLeaks. I want to share with our audience the explanation of how Corsi was so detailed in giving the two specific dates these WikiLeaks documents were going to drop.
I believe these Podesta emails would destroy Hillary. Now, why did I think they were coming out in October? Because I said to myself, if I had these emails, I'd use them as the October surprise.
But you didn't know that at the time, did you?
This is speculation.
Well, you didn't exactly write to him that it would be drip by drip.
Yes. No, I did, though, explain that to him. There were some phone conversations I had with him, in which I made.
So you essentially told Stone exactly what was going to happen?
Yes. What I told the special prosecutor was I thought I was giving Roger a cover story. In other words, I was allowing him to have an alternative explanation for why he said the Podesta is going to be in the barrel based on my research on Podesta.
So you were telling him that he could use this story even if it wasn't true?
Absolutely.
Okay, police comes to mind here, but just the idea that Trump is going to need to rely on the veracity of Roger Stone, that guy who believes we never landed on the moon here, and I can go through all the conspiracy theories from the Jerome Corsis of the world, and another bunch of folks that I don't even have time to mention. I mean, that would keep me up at night, what these guys would be prepared to say to Mueller, right?
Yes. This is, again, desperation time, right? I mean, Trump knows that he's cornered and he's in trouble, and he's reaching for anything he can that he hopes will float him out of it, including the testimony of Roger Stone and Jerome Corsi. It's not going to float you very far, but it may be all that Trump has at this point.
Finally, what could happen between now and then? And then is, by most people's estimates that I respect, they think before the end of the year, Mueller's going to have his report. But we do have a different acting attorney general, Mr. Whitaker. This is what James Comey had to say about Whitaker and about the likelihood or possibility that Whitaker would shut down the probe.
He may not be the sharpest knife in our drawer, but he can see his future and knows that if he acted in an extra legal way, he would go down in history for the wrong reasons, and I'm sure he doesn't want that.
He, obviously, Comey talking about Whitaker, I think he's wrong. I think Whitaker got put in for one job and one job only. I'm frankly surprised he hasn't moved on him yet. Congress still hasn't immunized Mueller. I think it delays the inevitable because come January they can have hearings in Congress. But what do you think, Roland? I think Whitaker, there is a Saturday Massacre 2.0, especially with a heightened paranoid president as we've seen the last week and a half.
On this one, Richard, I tend to agree with Jim Comey. I think we're so far down the road, and it is so clear that Trump is in deep trouble that Whitaker must fear that if he fires Mueller or does something to stop Mueller, he himself will be charged with obstruction of justice potentially, and he knows that he'll go down in history as you know, a guy 10 times worse than Robert Bork, who fired the Attorney General. I just don't see him wanting to do it or able to do it because he's such a political animal to begin with, and this would be complete political suicide forever. But we'll see. We'll see.
Your lips to God's ears, Roland. As always, thank you. Who knows what tomorrow will bring, but I appreciate tonight. Thank you as always.
I'm available, Richard.
Counting on it. All right, coming up next, the politics of the probe. How's Congress going to deal with a Russia investigation once, as I mentioned, in January, Democrats take control of the House? After the break, I'll ask a Congresswoman how she believes this all plays out.